Hey everyone, welcome to the day 42 read-along for The Novel of Followers, a project where I write one word for every follower my Instagram account has until I've written an entire novel. My name is Nicholas Hellyer, and I'm your author. As of day 42, we are up to 5,119 followers, so we are currently just over 10% of the way to our 50,000 goal. If you want to join the followers and actually affect what I write into our novel, follow me on Instagram, where I ask a daily question and your answers affect how the story unfolds. My Instagram username is @novel_of_followers. If you stay tuned for after the reading portion of today's podcast, I'm going to start this part of the podcast where I talk for a few minutes loosely about the novel. Some thoughts I've been having behind the scenes, how I'm writing the characters, and what I'm looking forward to. If you want to know more about the process, listen through to the end. Without further ado, let's pick up where we left off on the last read-along, days 29 to 42. "What is going on?" Magnus asked. He set Gideon onto a stool and leaned him forward in an unconscious slump over the bar. "If you want to stay alive through the night, shut up and listen." April reached under the bar and brought up another handgun. "Can you shoot?" "Two-time 12 and under state Arizona handgun competition finalist," Magnus said confidently. "Good for you," April said as she handed him the pistol. "If you see anything come up from the basement, shoot it. Don't hesitate. Velexi will gut you before you can say supercalifragilisticexpialidocious." "That's a lot of time," Magnus mumbled. "Uncle," April said, ignoring him. "Keep everyone in the dark. No need to let him know that a Velix is roaming about." "Sure," Gainsborough said. "Time to hunt a Velix," April said. Magnus followed closely behind once more as they descended the stairs into the basement. Two rays of flashlight, backed by the barrels of handguns, pierced into the darkness. April kept deadly quiet, listening for any sound of a Velix. Velexi were known as shade hunters. Without bright light, their black bodies couldn't be distinguished from shadow. Often, that single attribute meant that once unwary prey knew a Velix was close, it was far too late. A twisting mass of jet-black arms, hands, and feet that clamped onto prey with bone-crushing force and tore pieces off for its countless, tiny mouths. Its compact shape and spindly limbs allowed it to imitate the shadow of anything, and once found, it rolled over hands and feet like a ball. Once again, they passed into the basement, this time checking in every room to see if the shadows danced with movement. Sweat beaded on April's forehead. She kept deathly silent. "So," Magnus said in a whisper, "that thing wasn't from no movie. It was real. I saw it with my own two eyes." "A Velix is an alien," April said. The jig was up. Magnus had seen too much. He might as well know the situation if he was going to be executed by the Time Council. "It's an apex predator. I'll explain everything if we make it out of here alive. Deal?" "I think I might just go," Magnus said. "Too late for that, cowboy." "It ain't too late if I'm still breathing." April threw a hand up to Magnus's mouth and froze. Sound was the way to catch a stalking Velix. When prey came too close, the 100 razor-lined mouths of a Velix chattered with anticipation. 3 hands of long black fingers reached out from a still shadow and clasped onto April's ankle. It swept her from her feet and onto her back. "Shoot it!" April screamed. The Velix crawled over her body. Slick, wet limbs dripped a viscous slime onto her. Its 100 mouths frothed and drooled. A dozen small hands gripped her arms and legs and held tight. Razor-sharp claws dragged across her exposed shirt under the opening of her leather jacket. Magnus held his gun and flashlight toward the thing. He couldn't find a clear shot at any single portion of the creature. Then, a second shadow fell upon April. It passed so close by Magnus and with such speed that his hair swept back. A human shape, nearly as dark as the Velix, descended onto it. April's screams were drowned by the shrill hiss of 100 mouths mixed with the gurgling of alien blood. The Velix slumped over onto the floor, lifeless and still. April unwound herself from its many arms, then glanced up to meet the gaze of Kiora. "I thought today couldn't get any worse," April said. "A rude thing to say after I have just saved your skin." Kiora knelt by the Velix and plunged a long bronze dagger into its belly. Magnus hovered his flashlight over the scene and gulped. "Who are you?" "Kiora is my traveler name. I am Kekheret Nebti of the Two Lands." "Kekheret Nebti, like the Egyptian princess?" "How the hell did you know that?" April asked with wonder. "Minored in ancient civilizations," Magnus answered. "April has told me Egypt is the name of my homeland." Magnus looked at her awestruck. April stood and wiped at the alien slime that stuck to her clothes to little effect. "What is this?" Magnus asked. At that moment, Kiora knelt and pressed her dagger into the Velix corpse once again, carving its flesh. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Days 29 to 43 podcast, the Read-Along podcast. Like I said at the beginning of this today's episode, this is going to be just a section where I talk candidly. I'm not really going to edit it, but I just want to pull back the curtain a little bit so you can get more insight than the daily updates or the read-alongs to how the process is going for me. It's been really good. That's the process so far. I've been having a lot of fun. I'm really excited about a lot of things that are happening. I think I'm going to try to throw this portion into every read-along podcast, just so if you're interested, you can get a bit more of what's going on behind the scenes. A few things I want to talk about today is we have crossed over 5,000 followers since last read-along podcast, and that sets us at just over 10% of our goal number of words and followers, which is 50,000. That's when I'm going to be calling this a completed novel, or at least that's where I'm going to be allowing myself to complete the novel. So with that in mind, here's the first little behind the scenes thing. I've been really structuring the novel in a format, the Save the Cat Writes a Novel format specifically, in order to provide some sort of foundation, because the nature of this collaboration, this project, the Novel of Followers, it's inherently, so much of it is inherently out of my control, because I'm trying to focus so hard on writing a story that is influenced and based and created by the collaboration with the followers every day. And that's why I'm making the updates every day and I'm adding the words every day, because if I have 30 words to add on a Tuesday, those 30 words are going to be immensely different than if I just had 15 on Tuesday and 15 on Wednesday. Because everything that you say and do in the comments are influencing how I see our novel moving forward. So right now, according to that Save the Cat Writes a Novel, I'm following the beat sheet to really help me keep this thing structured. And I'm sure plenty of you who are listening are writers and fans of authors and fans of the process. So you've probably heard of the Save the Cat Writes a Novel. But the beat sheet's really useful, and we actually are into the 10 to 20% of the beat sheet where we are in the debate section. We've just entered into the debate, and that debate is going to be for April to decide, because April is really our main character. For April to decide if she is going to accept what's come her way and if she's going to take the first steps onto this journey. And it's all centered around the idea that her saloon was just attacked. It's something that hasn't happened before. And I've just sprinkled it into the story so far, but in the world that I'm building, the Four Deuces Saloon is kind of one of the final bastions of safety for travelers outside of this like elite group called the Time Council. And they are this group that kind of manages time travel throughout reality. And it's a bit of a um, individual versus an institution conflict that I'm trying to approach right now, between the individual being the Four Deuces Saloon, and the institution being this time council that's kind of wiped out all of the other bastions for the travelers to come to and not be ostracized or just outright attacked because of this innate power that they have to travel, but instead be celebrated and welcomed and be able to commune. And that's the Four Deuces Saloon. We're going to be exploring a lot more of that as the book progresses, because I think that's going to be one of the reasons why April's really charged in her debate and her decision to seek out why the saloon was attacked, and who's attacking it. And that's going to be a big part of the story moving forward. We just introduced our 5th character of the main crew. I've been saying the main crew in the updates because I've really wanted to have, since this was decided that it was a time travel focused story, because the genre that I was given one of the first days was medieval horror, and I'd already written it set, like the first 3 days I'd already written it set in 2024, so I had to figure out some way to bridge that gap. Time travel, bada bing bada boom, we're good. In order to do that, though, I wanted to have a really cool mix of characters from across time, and that would be our main crew in this horror, almost like mystery thriller it's gearing up to be. And that really excited me because that gave me the opportunity to bring in some very different perspectives. And with that in mind, we just introduced our 5th and main and final character of the main crew, Kiora, aka Kekherit-Nebti, who's actually inspired by the true Egyptian princess Kekherit-Nebti from the 5th dynasty of Egypt, aka the 2500s BCE, or 2400s, 2500s, around then. And that gives us a really well-rounded historical cast in our main crew. April and Magnus being the present dayers from our time, Gideon from the 900s, like a European 900s is what I'm thinking. Really the Dark Ages, or the early medieval ages, rather. We have Deidre, who represents a lot of the future and a lot of the technical side of our sci-fi world, and she's going to be bringing a lot of stability and grounding to the time travel devices that we'll be using. And of course, Kiora, who's representing an ancient civilization as in ancient Egypt. It's going to create a lot of cool dynamics because it's both, there's a lot of foundation for me to pull from, but at the same time, it's so loose, it's so open to be melded that that we really can create these characters in any way that we want, and they can feel alive and dynamic and just strange coming from their own times. Really looking forward to that. I mentioned in the daily update that I'm really excited about Kiora being a representative of ancient Egypt, because in one of the other days, I think in like week 2 or 3, I asked what moment in time that you, the followers, would like to see us explore, and Cleopatra crowning herself emperor was one of the top comments. So I think it's going to be a really cool exploration of that scene, of that moment, when Kiora, as one of our main characters, is witnessing Cleopatra, her royal descendant, not necessarily by blood, but by, Queen of Egypt status, crown herself, and what this means for Kiora. And if Cleopatra is able to bridge that gap of like understanding in our story, time travel, what that means to Cleopatra, that she meets somebody that is a historical figure for her, it's going to be very exciting. Speaking on Kiora's introduction as well, that was the day, I think it was either 41 or 40, that I asked about how much romance you wanted in our novel. And I was pleasantly surprised to hear that most people just wanted very little to maybe like a sprinkle of it. And that's about how I see epic fantasy adventure novels as well. You're not looking for specific romance as a genre when you're looking for epic fantasy, or like a mystery thriller. It's nice to have some to really create three-dimensional characters, but it's not a focus. And that's exactly what I had planned, which is why I was so pleasantly surprised to see you confirm that with your interests. I did plant a little seedling of a relationship when I first introduced Kiora, and that is this relationship between Kiora and April. And my immediate thought was that they are exes, and that alone creates an inherent dynamic between them that we can jump right into. We have less to build from them just being strangers or being like very being unacquainted beyond just being in the saloon at the same time. We already have characters who are strangers to each other, especially in our main crew. Magnus is brand new to most of the faces. April and Gideon are acquainted to a degree. April and Deidre do have a long history. And since April is kind of our main character right now that's grounding us in the story, I feel like it's important to not just surround her with strangers for the sake of the audience. Having some sort of existing backstory that we can learn about in parallel to learning about new characters, aka strangers like Gideon and Magnus, it'll create a better dynamic and a more interesting dynamic reading forward. It's not all like, oh, I didn't know that about you. Oh, I didn't know that about you. Because we didn't know, these characters didn't know each other at all. It now provides moments like, oh, I know about you to the degree that I can assume this new thing in our journey. And maybe I'm right or maybe I'm wrong, but it creates much more opportunity and more interesting character dynamics than everybody being brand new to each other. So I think I'm going to hold on to the idea that Kiora and April once had a more intimate relationship, and since then it fell apart, and there is this level of like clashing, like headbutting each other, really. Somebody on that romance, no, somebody on the Kiora question, I think day 41, where I was asking about Kiora's personality, somebody said that maybe she's very headstrong and that clashes with April. And I think that I'm going to really stick with that. That's kind of an idea that I had when I first thought about introducing Kiora. And I'm going to hold on to that because that sounds like perfect for those two. And a good reason why maybe their relationship didn't work out. Maybe April's a bit too much a perfectionist and Kiora's a bit too much of a headstrong, like powerhouse voice in the room. And they just clashed in that way and it couldn't work out. And you know, maybe in the journey of the novel moving forward, they make more of an amends and find their relationship back in a point where they can be friends again, beyond just forced necessity for the journey that they're on. I'm also not going to shy away from intimate relationships with the other characters. I think Deidre as a shapeshifter inherently creates an interesting level of possibility for intimate relationships with all characters. That's something that we will have to see about. I also just like gender fluidity, and having a shapeshifter is inherently gender fluid, so we will see what that's like. And of course, Magnus is like a frat boy in college, so I don't think he's going to be against flirting with alien ladies. We'll see. Again, romance is not a focus, but having those fun moments can really bring up the banter, can really bring up the dynamic relationships within a novel, especially with another aspect of what I want to bring to our novel, which is almost like a D&D podcast bits of introducing a lot of characters and a lot of names. I have 3 daily updates where I've asked people for name suggestions, and I have so many names that I just need to start writing side characters that exist for like 1 to 2 sentences at a time, where they like go to a bar in space and they meet a character named like Leroy Flabbergaston, and that's a name that you provided as the followers in the comment section, and I want to include as many as I can just for the fun of it. Like, that'll be a really fun bit, kind of like it is in a D&D podcast or in any really D&D campaign, where you ask the DM what an NPC's name is and they have to think of one on the spot. I think it would be really cool if we could create this expected joke throughout the novel where everybody's kind of waiting for when's the next silly name gonna be introduced for a character that we never hear from again. Maybe it even becomes a joke where like Magnus has a habit of introducing himself very formally, like with a firm handshake or something, or maybe Gideon because he's from a different time period and he's a bit more of like a meek, shy character. Maybe there's a lot of introductions and those result in really catching people off guard and introducing their names that you, the followers, suggested to me, and we can have a running joke throughout the book there. Speaking of running jokes, this is the last thing I'm going to talk about on today's read along, because I feel like I've just been spewing a lot of open thoughts, and I hope that if you've stayed and listened to this long, you enjoy those just stream of consciousness thoughts. Again, I'm not editing this part. The book is camp. I'm realizing this. I've had some people who have been following the project let me know that the premise, the collaboration process, and kind of like how extreme of a puzzle it is that I have to piece so many ideas and suggestions from the comments together, it's very camp. And I've been kind of embracing that over the past few days, where there is a level of like everybody who's going to be reading it, especially from the people who have followed the Instagram account and who are suggesting and affecting the story, we're all on the in. We all know that this is like, it's like there's a joke going on and we're all in on it, so we can all enjoy it together. And I think that writing it from that perspective gives me just a little more leeway to have even more fun with it. I am a very, I like to write very seriously. I like prose. I like really exasperated writing. The editing process for me is terrible because I just have to change so much, and it's going to be for this book. But I think I feel myself being able to take a step back from that, and I'm still going to write this very seriously and with my determined style, because I think that's part of what kind of makes it camp as well, is that there's so many ridiculous things going on, but I'm writing it as if it were a very serious fantasy thing. Like, I had April say supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, a suggestion from one of the comments, in a completely serious way that's unaddressed in a humorous way at all. And I think that's kind of the camp that I want to go for. It's going to be ridiculous. I haven't read Discworld, but it's on my read list, any of them. And it's how I imagine from what people have described to me how Discworld is, where it's almost, I mean, Discworld is very satirical of classical fantasy, but so far we're not really doing satire yet. We might be doing satire at some points, but we're definitely doing serious camp serious. That's what we're going to call this book. No, I'm joking. And we're going to have a lot of fun with that. So I'm glad you're all with me. All of the followers are going to be in on this joke with me. So thanks. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening to the read along for days 29 to 42. I'm going to be exploring more of this stream of consciousness, drawing back the curtain so you can get more insight than the 1-minute daily updates, if that's something you want. If you want to support the story, follow me on Instagram at novel_of_followers. Every day I ask a question in my daily updates, and your answers affect what happens in our novel. This is our novel, after all. The song in the intro and outro is Stranger by Alex Morse. Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure you follow the daily updates on Instagram and check back in 2 weeks for the next read along. See you then.